Is new right tackle Mike Jerrell the critical piece the Falcons need to fill Kaleb McGary's void?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is around the corner, so visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets right now. Now, if you do not know me, I am your humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Sirius Black, aka Mr. Drew, aka the Jolly Green Giant, aka the Iron that sharpens the iron, aka Mr. AKA, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast, and I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this humble podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are breaking down the Falcons' final cuts, initial cuts. I guess initial is probably the best way to put it, because there will probably be more moves between now and the start of the regular season. We'll talk about some of the bubble guys and how and why they made the roster as opposed to the bubble guys that didn't make the roster. We try to be positive on this podcast all the time. That's all we are positive on this podcast. But we got to start with the big move of the day. The Falcons went out there and got their new right tackle. We talked about this on Monday. It was a TBD, to be determined, addition on the offensive tackle. And that, addition was former Seattle Seahawks right tackle Mike Jerrell, former 6th-round pick. The Falcons acquired him for a 2027 7th-round pick. So Terry did not give up another 2026 pick in order to get a new tackle. He gave up a 2027 pick. And of course, by the time we get to 2027, we'll only have 3 picks at that point in time. But hey, we'll worry about that later, right? Terry's like, I ain't going to be here. So, as we've discussed, over the last week since Kaleb McGary went down with his injury on Wednesday, that, this impending move that now we know is Mike Jerrell is really going to be the plan B to fill the Kaleb McGary void, right? Plan A is going to be Elijah Wilkinson, and plan B, you add a player like Mike Jerrell in the event that plan A doesn't work and Elijah Wilkinson struggles over the first part of the season. But the plan is probably, and it feels very likely that will continue to be based off of today's actions, that the Falcons plan is starting Elijah Wilkinson until Storm Norton comes back, which could be 4 to 6 weeks from now, longer or whatever. We know it will be at least week 5 at the earliest, because Storm Norton is going on IR, but we'll talk about that later. So if Wilkinson struggles between now and then Jerrell becomes a pivot point. As I've mentioned before, that's probably not going to be week 1. Maybe that's week 3. That gives Jerrell a month to get up to speed in this offense, which is the usual timeline that it usually takes to when you add a player before you can really count on them to make significant contributions. So it's like week 3, week 4, maybe week 5. Is your sort of target date for Mike Jerrell. But in the meantime, it's going to be Elijah Wilkinson. And as we've said all along, the goal really for this move and any move that the Falcons were going to make was treading water, right? And, I've seen people express their disappointment that this isn't necessarily a home run trade for the Atlanta Falcons. And I feel like people's expectations were too high, right? I think a lot of people thought the Falcons were going to find some set it and forget it right tackle. And all of a sudden we were like, oh, the right tackle position is no longer going to be a worry for us. And that was never a realistic goal, right? And, I've seen people say, oh, there were better tackles available. And I'm like, who's better that's available than Mike Jerrell? There certainly are older tackles, more experienced tackles than Mike Jerrell, but you got to remember, you need to find somebody who actually has experience playing right tackle. And Jerrell has that 4 years as a starter in college at Findlay in Division II, 40 career starts at right tackle, 3 starts last year at that position. And I've seen a lot of people pushing for like the Cam Robinsons of the world and the Andre Dillards of the world that have no experience playing right tackle. And switching sides isn't easy. Penei Sewell, as talented a player as we've seen come into the NFL in the last 10, 20 years at the offensive tackle position, took 6 months to learn how to make the switch from left to right side. And that was one of the better, transitions that we've seen, one of the more successful transitions that we've seen. There was no realistic world where you could sign a left tackle and teach that guy to play right tackle in 2 weeks, right? And then you talk about scheme fit. And Jerrell is, at least in theory, we'll talk about that later, but in theory is a scheme fit, right? In the outside zone scheme. Now, Seattle didn't run a ton of outside zone last year. They did switch to that with Clint Kubiak being their new offensive coordinator this year. And I've seen some various reports that, maybe Jerrell didn't necessarily fit quite, but he has the skills. I'm sorry, I was going to say schools. He has the skills and the tools to fit in an outside zone scheme because he's a good athlete. He can get on the move. I've seen him climb to the second level. So there's upside there. There's developmental upside for him to be a good fit in the scheme, even if, it may take some time, again, to get him up to speed in it. And, I've seen, people suggesting right tackles that aren't scheme fits, right? At least in theory, Jerrell is. These guys that are purely gap guys, right? And, you're sitting there saying, but Aaron, you've been talking about diversifying the run game. And it's like, yes, some diversifying the run game, some, right? It was never going to be a complete overhaul and a brand new scheme that the Falcons were going to run, switching away from an outside zone scheme. We've heard Zach Robinson say this, right? Going back to the beginning of August, right? We being, the preeminent Zach Robinson zealots. We monitor everything that he says. And he said, basically, we're sticking with our core foundation of wide zone. We're going to add some complements to get that going. We have some good mixers. And so the question has always never been, oh, we're going to change the run scheme. It's what are those mixers? How many mixers are we going to have? Is it 5% new mixers or 25%? As I've said, 5% is basically you're playing lip service. You're not doing anything. 25% is actually potentially going to move the needle. We'll find out where that number is between 5 and 25%. But primarily the Falcons are going to remain an outside zone scheme. So this was never going to be a home run move that the Falcons were going to make. They kind of made this bed. Now they have to kind of lie in it when it comes to the, offensive line depth. Because I remember back in March, I was listening to a podcast, a daily Falcons podcast, but I can't quite remember the name. But I remember distinctly it was on a March 19th episode where that person who did this daily podcast was talking about how the Falcons' decision to run it back with the same backup offensive lineman was a clear sign of their complacency upon the offensive line. And, I believe this very same podcast, spent the 3 previous offseasons saying, hey, maybe the Falcons should draft an offensive tackle, and whoever hosts that podcast, right? Maybe they're too humble to admit it. But, that person seems to know a thing or two about ball. He's so humble that he won't even admit it was him that said it. He's just going to talk about himself in the third person. That's how humble that person is, But I would endorse listening to that podcast because it feels like whenever that person talks about anything related to football, it's relevant. You just don't know that it's going to be relevant. And so if you want to have a conversation about the team's previous complacency, which has been a through line, particularly those last 2 off seasons, right? And the team's decision to ignore or neglect problems in March that are discussed on this, so humble, illustrious podcast, right? That always seem to come back to bite them in August, and they're scrambling in August to add players at these positions that they ignore in March. Yeah, we could absolutely have that conversation. But in the meantime, I'm content with the Jerrell move. It's not necessarily something that's going to guarantee success in the short term. Maybe it's an upgrade over guys like Norton and Wilkinson. There's a decent chance he could be. He's got more upside than those guys do, given that he's young and developing. But, it also has some potential long-term impact, right? I think this is a reasonably good bet that the Falcons are making, given the circumstances, right? We know McGary's going to be back in 2026, but beyond that, who knows, right? That's the last year where his contract is guaranteed. Jerrell's still on his rookie deal, second year of his rookie deal. As a former 6th-round pick last year, that means he's signed through the 2027 season. So if you can develop him behind McGary for the next 2 years, or, again, whatever happens this year, maybe, just maybe he could be a long-term replacement for Kaleb McGary, 2+ years from now. And you only gave up a 2027 7th-round pick in order to do that. So I sit here and I say, Terry, not bad. Good job, Terry. So in the long term, this could be looking really good in 2 or 3 years. It could be looking really good in 2 or 3 months, or it could be looking really terrible. Again, you never know with the Atlanta Falcons. So it's probably not going to save our season. But again, that was never a realistic goal because all you're trying to do in 2025 is treading water. And that has more to do with the play caller than it has to do with adding any sort of savior at the right tackle position that you were going to sign or acquire in the next 2 weeks. And I repeat, it's more to do with the play caller than anything else that you were going to do. So it feels very relevant now that when, someone spent 6 months talking about the play caller this offseason feels real relevant, doesn't it? Feels extremely relevant, right? So, become an everydayer of this podcast. Don't be a casual, and you'll be hearing some of this stuff all the time. So I sit there and I say, in addition to being every day and listening to the podcast every single day, maybe you want to become a Locked On Falcons insider. We'll be taking a look at Elijah Wilkinson's film at right tackle or at left tackle, I guess you could say, against the Tennessee Titans. And then we'll also be looking at, Mike Jerrell's film from last year, as well as this summer in Seattle later this week. And then you can check that out for free with a 14-day free trial, then $4.99 a month after that point at the link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons. Not only do you get that, film breakdown, you also get insight, hours. I already broke down all these cuts for the Locked On Falcons insiders hours before you guys are hearing it on the podcast. And if you sign up on Wednesday, you'll get that 14-day free trial, and you'll probably be able to get access to the first extended all 22 review coming off of the heels of that Tampa Bay Bucks game following week 1, as well as part of that 14-day free trial. So, time it out right, and you guys will get the best of both worlds. But that's going to in our conversation about Mike Jerrell, we'll get into the rest of the cuts, including the official word that Kaleb McGary is out for the season, as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So this episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is right around the corner, which means fantasy football season is back, and you can feel the buzz in the air. Everybody researching, drafting, and building their championship squads. And if you haven't started or joined the league yet, why not do so on Yahoo Fantasy? I'm doing it on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too. Whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league, with the season kickoff on September 4th, now is the time to start playing Yahoo Fantasy, and they have so many fun ways to play. You can try the brand new Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine League mode, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated weekly until one team is left standing. And if you want to play instantly with friends, try the new Draft with Friends mode. If you prefer the classics, get your crew together and go head-to-head in a private league. And if you don't have a crew, no problem. You can join a public league. That's the easiest way to play. The NFL season kicks off on September 4th, so don't wait. Start your league right now and go draft now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. That's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Before we get into the Falcons cuts, we got an important request here on Locked On. We want to hear from you. We put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is your chance to tell us what you love, what you don't love, and answer all the questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcasts.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered in a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. Again, that's lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thanks for helping us out. So the big news besides the Jerrell trade is that Kaleb McGary is officially done for the year. The Falcons put him on injured reserve. The two designations that they have for injured reserve for basically the short-term IR for guys that can come back during the season were used on Taquan Graham and Storm Norton. We figured Norton would be one. We mentioned on Monday that Graham or Clark Phillips probably would be another option there. We might get some news about Phillips tomorrow. We'll circle back to that in a second when we talk about the cuts. But, McGary being down for the year is not a huge surprise. We've been operating under that assumption basically since Friday when Raheem Morris gave his update and said he was going to miss significant time. And I'm like, that's the exact words he said about DeMarco Hellens last year, and he didn't come back last year. So, again, we're going to tread water for a year. Hope that McGary comes back stronger in 2026. And in the meantime, we'll roll with Elijah Wilkinson, Mike Jerrell, Storm Norton, and hopefully we won't have to see Jack Nelson see the field. So currently the Falcons roster is at 52 as I'm recording this, and Jerrell would be that 53rd guy. But let's get into the moves that the Falcons wound up making. They waived several players, including running backs Jashawn Corbin and Carlos Washington, wide receivers Chris Blair, Dylan Drummond, and Nick Nash, tight end Josh Simon, guard Joshua Gray, tackle Jordan Williams, D tackle Simeon Barrow, linebacker I think they cut Ronnie Harrison, didn't they? Right, cornerback Kobe Bryant, cornerback Dante Manning, safety Henry Black, and kicker Lenny Craig. Yes, I messed up my list that I'm reading off of for you guys. But you can see on the screen if you're watching on YouTube that I had it in correct order. And the difference between waivers is basically it basically means NFL teams will be able to claim these guys, right? They can basically absorb whatever their current contracts, which most of these guys are undrafted free agents, and they can put in their waiver claims before 12 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. If guys get claimed, they go to other teams' NFL roster. The priority of claims is based off of the previous year's draft order. So the Falcons are 15th in the waiver claims, which is probably why they traded for Jerrell, because they were like, we're not guaranteed to be able to get the guy that we want. And Jerrell's the guy that we want with the waiver claims. If any of the other 14 teams above them claim Jerrell, they would automatically get him. And so basically that priority goes to whoever got the highest priority. And when you look at these players that got waived, zero surprises. Every one of them we predicted to be cut on our Monday show. I'm not too worried about too many of these guys getting waived. I think maybe one or two guys, but probably not as many as fans fear. I think Chris Blair and Lenny Krieg are probably the two I'd be most concerned about getting scooped up by another team. I think everybody else should clear, but we'll see on Wednesday if that is the case. Then the Falcons released a bunch of guys, and releasing guys basically means that guy has 4 or more experience. They're not subject to waivers. They essentially, when they get cut, become free agents. And that gives them flexibility, and that gives the team a little bit of flexibility, which we'll circle back to. But they released quarterback Easton Stick, offensive tackle Brandon Parker, center Jake Hansen, who was previously put on IR earlier this week and on Saturday. And, they released him with an injury settlement. D tackle Kentavious Street was also released. Edge rusher Khalid Kareem, linebacker Ronnie Harrison, cornerback CJ Henderson, cornerback Keith Taylor, and safety Jordan Fuller. Now, Fuller to me is the one surprise of this group. I suspect that they will re-sign him. I think they're doing roster shenanigans. You guys may recall a couple of years ago where they cut long snapper Josh Harris. I think this was like 21 or 22. And they cut him right before the season started just so they can maneuver the roster a little bit. And that's one of the things about these guys that are released, where you can basically tell them, hey, we're going to bring you back. Don't go out and sign with another team. We're going to cut you. We'll bring you back in 3 days after we make some other roster moves and whatnot. And usually you can get those players to agree to that, especially some of the players that weren't necessarily super coveted in the offseason like Jordan Fuller was. But, I'm guessing maybe this is a way to sneak Clark Phillips, or not sneak is not the right word, but to put Clark Phillips or somebody else potentially, if there's another injured player that I'm not thinking of, on IR at a later date. Because again, you only get 2 designations for that short-term IR before final cuts. They use that on Norton and Graham, right? And then you can wait till Wednesday or Thursday to put it on other players, right? You have up to 8 players that you can bring back from IR during the course of the season. And you don't have to necessarily designate that ahead of time. You can just basically if we want to bring that guy back, we will bring him back or whatever, up to 8 times. And so I could see the Falcons basically saying, we're going to cut Fuller today. We're going to wait tomorrow, 2 days, put Phillips on IR, and then we're going to re-sign Fuller and get that roster spot back. So we'll see. So, Easton Stick, I know a lot of people were surprised. If you listen to Monday's show, we predicted him to get cut and be brought back on the practice squad. So that's the expectation. He might come back on the roster after week 1, I think is probably a likelihood on that point. CJ Henderson and Kentavious Street were 2 guys that I did project on my 53-man roster. I think the Falcons opted to keep Lakeal London because he's more of that true nose tackle over Kentavious Street, which is another indication that the 3-4 bear front is going to be their base defense this year. The Falcons have been trying to make Street a penetrating one technique nose tackle for the past 2 years. It has not gone particularly well, but he was getting the starting reps in the preseason and that role. And so I assumed he would get kept over London. London, like Morgan Fox, who was cut on Saturday, was playing deep in the fourth quarter. So that made me think, they're not going to keep Lakeal London, but maybe they cut Street. They plan on re-signing him, and then they waive London at a later date, right? It's going to make it easier for London to clear waivers if they don't cut him on Tuesday, because he's one of those players that I do think would struggle to clear waivers because teams are looking for, wide-body nose tackles all around the league. And so if they wait till like Thursday or Friday to waive London, it's much more likely that he'll clear waivers and they can bring back Street or whatever. So Mike Ford is back. D. Alford is back. Let us all rejoice that those guys, we'll talk more about those guys a little bit later. The other moves that they made were in the reserves list. As I mentioned, the 3 IR moves that they made. Troy Anderson is going to the regular season PUP list, which basically functions like the IR does once the season starts. He'll be out for at least the first 4 weeks and then eligible to come back. Will he come back? Again, I'm operating similar to Kaleb McGary on the assumption that Troy Anderson is going to miss the entire year. We'll see if that changes at some point later in the year. But basically, I had 4 players on my projection that did not make the initial 53. We'll see how many of those guys are on the roster week 1. That was one of the things I noted, where this was my projection was more of a week 1 projection than necessarily what this initial look would be. But the 4 players that did not make it that I projected to make it were Kentavious Street, CJ Henderson, Jordan Fuller, and Taquan Graham. The 4 players that are essentially replacing those guys are Nathan Carter, LaKale London, Clark Phillips, and D. Alford. And, I mentioned, a tackle TBD, and that wind up being Mike Jerrell. So we'll talk about some of those bubble guys that did wind up make it, like a Nathan Carter. Why did they make it as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons? So this is your last chance to check out FanDuel Futures Day on August 26th. So if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead, pause the video, download the FanDuel app, and make your futures bet. But for those of you that aren't watching us on August 26th or listening on August 26th, you still can get in on this NFL action with this can't miss offer, because right now new customers at FanDuel can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the FanDuel app. And I love using FanDuel because it fits however you like to bet. Player props. You can build that same game parlay, or you can just jump on live and see how the action unfolds. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the best way to get a little bit more energy on your Sundays. And the payouts come fast and loose, just like Michael Penix's touchdowns. So if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app right now, or by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. FanDuel, play your game. So we had 7 players that made it that I think were on the bubble. We mentioned on Friday's episode after the game against the Cowboys that there were 44 roster locks. I think officially I had 45 going into that. And then coming out of that game, we were like, oh, let's take Morgan Fox off of the roster locks list based off of that game. And that proved to be prescient. And so basically 43 out of the 44 players that I thought were roster locks coming out of that, preseason finale against the Cowboys made the cut. The one exception was Jordan Fuller. And I told the Locked On Falcons insiders at that time, when I was telling them there was 45, there was 8 remaining spots. And I was pretty confident that 7 of them would be an RB3, a wide receiver 7, an OL 8, the 8th offensive lineman, the 5th D lineman, the 5th linebacker, and the 5th and 6th corner. Right. And we can just look at the 7 bubble guys. And Nathan Carter was the RB3. David Sills was the 7th wide receiver. Javon Gwynn is the 8th offensive lineman. LaKale London is that 5th D lineman that basically replaced Morgan Fox. Josh Woods was that 5th linebacker. And D. Alford and Mike Ford were the 5th and 6th corner. And again, we'll see about Clark Phillips. Right now, we'll put Clark Phillips at CB7 until we get more clarity on his injury status heading into the season. But, let's talk about each of those 7 guys. Nathan Carter, right, showed a lot of juice and speed at the running back position. We know that's something that the Falcons want to add more explosive runs to their offense. So it's understandable why they valued Nathan Carter. The question is going to be, is he going to be active on game days in order for the Falcons to capitalize on that juice and speed? At this point, I think the answer is probably not. This is one of the reasons why I only had 2 running backs on my roster going into week 1, because I think we're only going to get 2 active running backs. But the Falcons did try to get Nathan Carter a lot more work on special teams in that Cowboys game. So maybe they liked enough of what they saw to justify activating him for that 48-man roster when we get to week 1. We'll see. David Sills, basically, as I mentioned several times, he's basically injury insurance in the event that Darnell Mooney isn't ready to go at some point. Whenever Mooney is healthy, I think we'll see Sills go to the practice squad when the Falcons will likely only carry 6 healthy wide receivers into the season. We'll see if that's week 1 with Mooney and his status, but Sills was able to make it as kind of the primary backup at the Z wide receiver spot behind Drake London. That spot was formerly held by Casey Washington, but with Mooney's injury, Washington got more looks at the X, and so the Falcons like Sills as that Z. But again, once Mooney comes back, Washington will have that be able to do double duty. Kadero Hodge also has experience playing all three wide receivers positions. So that's why I feel like Sills at this point in time is a little bit extraneous once the Falcons receivers are fully healthy. Javon Gwynn, you're not going to get me to say anything positive about Javon Gwynn on this podcast, right? I'm sorry to that man and his family, but I'm not going to sit here and lie on this podcast. So let's move on to LaKale London. As I said, a beefy nose tackle. We'll see if he lasts till week 1, but he had a very good preseason, was very disruptive, hard to move given his size, can be that 3-4 nose tackle that plays 15 snaps in the base defense on a weekly basis. And I remember when the Falcons basically punted on adding a nose tackle this offseason, we were like, oh, they're gonna find an Eddie Goldman replacement, right? And I remember people were like, well, they don't need one because they have LaKale London. I'm like, all right, but the Falcons were like, yeah, we have LaKale London, so until otherwise, they like LaKale London as their Eddie Goldman replacement. So we'll see how that goes. Josh Woods played well in the preseason. Now, if you watch Josh Wood prior to this summer, you would not necessarily be endorsing Josh Woods if you watched him in Arizona and whatnot. But hey, he's in year 8 now. It's like maybe he turned a corner. So hey, shout out to you, Josh Woods. You balled out. You earned a roster spot. We'll see if we'll see. Falcons linebacker depth is still a little sketchy, so we'll see on that front. I don't want to make any promises like, hey, Josh Woods, but hey, he played well enough that it gives you a little hope, maybe. And then it comes to D. Alford and Mike Ford, right? Alford making it, that's fine. It means the Falcons aren't all in on Billy Bowman. I'm not all in on Billy Bowman, so I get it. But this to me is nature on Brooks season, but hey, Falcons are still all about D. Alford. Hey, I'm not as hateful and spiteful towards D. Alford as everybody else is, because I remember the good times with D. Alford. 2022, 2023, we had some good times with D. Alford. 2024, not so good. And of course, the NFL is a "what have you done for me lately" league, and I understand why everybody has soured on D. Alford. I did not have D. Alford on any of my roster projections because I figured the Falcons would too sour on D. Alford based off how he played in the preseason. They probably should have soured on it, but hey, D, hey, it's resurrection season, it's redemption season for you. As for Mike Ford, Marquise Williams continues to have so much clout in this, when it comes to roster decisions. It brings me no joy to say this, but I gotta say special teams matter. So I've been vocal these last couple of days about my feelings about Mike Ford. I think he's the worst cornerback in the NFL. I don't think he makes up for it with plus special teams ability. So I am preying on this man's downfall every single day. So if you're going to be a Locked On Falcons insider, I'm sure we will do some Mike Ford watch where we get into some of these extended all 22s, and we'll be looking at Mike Ford as that gunner opposite Kadero Hodge, and we'll be breaking down, like, is Mike Ford earning his paycheck? Yes, I will devote 5 minutes out of a 2-hour extended all 22 review every single week to crack on Mike Ford. I'm sorry to that man, but not really. So we will see on that front if Mike Ford can redeem himself this upcoming season with stellar special teams play. I'm not going to hold my breath, but hey, this is why Marquise gets paid the big bucks, and Mike Ford apparently gets paid bigger bucks than I make. So it is what it is. So oh boy, we got so much more Mike Ford content. So that's why I'm not going on a rant right now. I'm saving it. I'm saving for that first extended all 22 review when he trips and falls, and it leads to like a 25-yard punt return. Oh, I'm going to be there. Oh yes. So those are the Falcons cuts. We'll see what other roster moves they make. Tomorrow we will be joined by Alan Stirk, the former co-host of the Locked On Falcons and Falc Fans podcast. That episode will be much later for those of you that check us out on YouTube, probably around 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. Just because we'll be recording that late, we'll get Alan's thoughts on all the things going on with the Falcons, as well as his expectations for the upcoming season. And if you listen to the audio side of things, you don't have to worry about it. It's going to be at the same time, 12 a.m. Eastern time, come Wednesday, Thursday morning, whenever. Yeah, with timing, 9 p.m. West Pacific. Shout out to the Cali Falc fans and Locked On Falcons everydayers that always are like, once I kiss my babies to sleep, I go and listen to, that very humble host, Aaron Freeman, and so you guys will still get it on time. But that's what's in store for you on the next Locked On Falcons. We'll be back with more great content. Go check out lockedonpodcasts.com/survey. to check out that survey for us. And then, of course, for your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Football as we're getting geared up for the regular season. You got to get your drafts in order. I know the Locked On Falcons insiders are getting ready for their drafts here for us in the next couple of days. And Locked On Fantasy Football, of course, is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.